a theme for the last few classes. It's all about what happens to a body when we become more sedentary. When we sit for long periods of time and we put our leg in what is typically a 90-degree bend in a chair, so the hip is bent and the knee is bent. And not only are these areas bent and being told to stay short and for hours at a time, we're also not using the muscles of the core. So this front hip flexor, the glute max, not being used. The quadricep here, the hamstring, not being used. So they're conditioned to be short, and they're also not only short, they're getting weaker. And so we want to do something about that. Now there's several different things that we can do, but what I want us to create is an action that produces a nice release. We've already done a low lunge with a bit of a hip stretch, but we're going to start in a standing position and engage ourselves in a certain way. So I want you to stand with the feet about hip distance, and I'd like you to step your right leg back. And I just want you to stay on the ball of the right foot. Don't bring the heel down. Lift the foot up, because I want you to bend the right knee. Now in this position, left knee should be right over the ankle, and we're balancing on the ball of the right foot right now. And so this is a modification of a warrior pose that we're in right now. But what I'd like us to do is to go ahead and tighten this right seat muscle. Just grip it nice and tight. It's almost like I'm pushing my right leg backward to make the seat muscle more tight. And I'm going to tuck my tailbone under a little bit. So I'm just sort of flattening my back and tucking the tailbone under enough to feel now a stretch right here in the front of my leg. So now we're holding ourselves in place. This back leg definitely not in a position of sitting. Go ahead and pull in your chest, lifting the chest upward, and even take those arms and stretch up. But that right seat muscle should be nice and tight. The leg trying to push itself backward. We're tucking under the tailbone to create our stretch. Take a deep breath. And that's good. We're going to come out of that, step onto this front leg, make it power up, and that's great. Now we're going to do the second side. So now it's going to be, as we step backward, it's our left foot that goes back, and we balance on the ball of the left foot. Now it may not seem the same one side versus the other, and there really isn't. You may be tighter on one side or weaker on one side. So get your balance onto the ball of that foot. It's as if we're intending to push the leg back behind us, and that helps us engage this seat muscle area. And not only are we acting like we want to push the leg backward, we're going to tuck the tailbone under. We're going to flatten our back. We're just going to tuck that tailbone under, push the leg backward, and we're going to create this stretch potential right here in the front of the leg and in front of the hip. Now pull in the core and lift up your chest, and if you want, take those arms up. But that left leg, we should be feeling action in the seat muscle. That's stretching the front of our hip. We got the tuck under of our tailbone as we pull our chest up. Let's take a deep breath. And then as we exhale, we step out of that. Now that's the high version of what the next thing I'm going to have us do, which is a stretch to open the front of the hip even more. So you might need extra padding. We're going to be in a low lunge, and we're going to have our left foot forward and our right leg back. So this second time we're not going to be standing. In fact, we're going to go into the right leg in a lunge, but then the right knee comes down. And at first I'm just going to rest the top of the right foot, because we're going to go into a passive stretch now. And so in this stretch, I'm just going to take weight forward and onto my hands a little bit until this front of my right hip is stretching. Now, I'm not being mean to myself. It's like, okay, I feel some tightness, so I'm not going to stretch further than I want to, because I'm trying to hold it in a very comfortable stretch in case the leg muscle can actually release. And maybe it can and maybe it won't. Most likely what we'll feel is that we begin a stretch, and if anything, it's getting stronger. Now if you have a block, you can lift yourself up a little higher, or you can even have your hands on this front leg, but pretty much it's a stretch that's not going to let go. So we'll come back out of it. Now we're going to tuck the toes of the right foot down. And right now I'm not feeling any stretch in the front. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that leg pushing backward again. I start to push my right leg as if I'm pushing it back away from me to engage the right seat muscle. Now let's get a strong seat muscle contraction, mind to body connection, leg pushing backward, and then we come a little bit forward slowly. And the leg keeps pushing back, the seat muscle on that right side very strongly active. And as we come forward, What we're missing is the stretch to the degree that it was before. Now maybe our hip doesn't go down any further than it went, and that's okay. But all we're doing right now is showing our body how if we contract one muscle group, it causes the reflex relaxation on the other side of the joint here in the front. And that's really good. And then we'll just back ourselves out of that. Okay, so now we're going to do our second side. So now the right leg is going to be the forward leg, and I'm going to stretch the left leg back into my lunge, but then bring the left knee down and rest the top of the left foot. Because the first part of this is a passive stretch. It doesn't feel passive when we get into it. So we start to take the weight onto our arms, and what we have is a very resistant muscle group. It's been sitting a lot. It's not used to coming forward like this. And that resistance isn't going to go away just because we happen to be, for these next few seconds, stretching when we've been sitting for literally hours at a time. So passive stretch with big muscles and muscles that are conditioned to be short, like the front of our hip is conditioned to be short, doesn't work very well. But we'll come back, we'll tuck the toes of our left foot down, and now we're going to act as if we're pushing the left leg backward. Sort of pushing it backward, and that helps me to engage that left seat muscle. So mind to body action into the seat muscle, leg trying to push backward a bit. And now we come gradually forward with that left leg pushing backward, backward, backward. And what we should be feeling is the back of the leg very active and the front of the hip not very active. Although one side versus the other, we're likely to feel different. But just keep pushing that leg back, pushing it back, and see what you can create as far as the contraction. So if the contraction is always stronger than the stretch, then we're making gains. But if the stretch becomes stronger than the contraction, then we basically stop making gains. Let's come out of that and let's come into a seated position. Now, if stretching were all we needed to do, our problem would be solved. But it's not. It's about a lifestyle, a conditioning of a leg and of a body that is problematic. And so we're going to create what is not done while we're sitting. Now, it's best to have hands that can brace us backward, or if you need to lean your back, the shoulder area against a wall for more bracing, so there's not as much pressure on your wrist, that would work. And then we're just going to let our legs go straight. Now what I want to do with this is create enough action here in the front of the hip that it's completely different than sitting. Because sitting, I'm almost in a seated position. If I was sitting up like this, I'd be in a seated position. But I'm going to lean back a little bit. I'm going to make my leg move like it doesn't when I sit. I'm going to bring my left leg toward my chest, bending the knee. And then I'm going to put the leg back down again. And I'm going to bring my right leg toward my chest. I'm going to bend the knee and come backward. Now what my body conveniently wants to do is just sort of collapse in on itself. And what I'm going to vibrantly do is elongate. I'm going to lean and arch back. So I'm going to pull my leg toward me while I'm leaning and arching back. And I'm going to do it on the other side. And we're just going to sort of march in place a little bit here. But the thing about it is our leg is coming closer to us than it would be in most chairs. And we're going to start to notice that this is a little bit tiresome. Not too bad. I mean, these are strong muscles that we're using. So they're more than capable of doing this. It will get fatiguing, and one side can fatigue faster than the other side. That's always the case. And so we've done a few of that, and so we'll just relax for a moment and I just take the weight off the hands because I'm not yet done. So the thing about muscles that are tight and muscles that are tight because of passive positions like sitting is that they are tight and they are typically weak. So we've got to get them stronger. So now our second goal, that was the hip flexor, goes from the low back, sweeps around the front of the pelvis to the front of the hip. But we've also got its counterpart right here, the front of the thigh, and we're going to get that active by stretching our legs out straight again and putting our hands back behind us again and elongating once more. But now the leg lift is simply a straight leg coming up, and we hold it for a moment and we feel our thigh. The leg comes down, we lengthen, we lift, we come down. Again, your body wants to round you in some way, so every time you're about to lift, lengthen and lift, and then come down, lengthen and lift, and then come down. Now this is good for creating strength where we need it. It's definitely putting warmth in the muscle. It, in its own way, is stretching the back of our leg, the hamstring region. This is really great for a lot of what afflicts us because of the seated position. And that's good. There we go, nicely done. But indeed, it's not quite as, as we're not as happy with it as we would be if we were making action in a different way, in a stretch.